In the year 2478, humanity had stretched its reach far beyond Earth. Countless planets across the galaxy now bore the mark of human exploration. Shining cities on barren moons, sprawling colonies nestled in alien jungles, and research outposts orbiting distant stars. Among these pioneers was Captain Leora Vance, a seasoned leader known for her sharp instincts and unyielding determination. She commanded the Aegis, a sleek research vessel tasked with mapping uncharted sectors of space. The Aegis drifted silently through the void, its crew focused on their duties. Inside the ship's control room, holographic screens displayed swirling star maps, sensor readings, and endless streams of data. The hum of machinery filled the air as the team worked tirelessly to document every detail of this unknown region. But it wasn't excitement that drove them. It was routine. Days blurred together in the monotony of deep space travel. That changed when the signal came. It started as a faint crackle, barely noticeable over the static of background radiation. Tessa Rourke, the ship's brilliant but reclusive engineer, was the first to hear it. Her fingers froze above her console as she leaned closer to listen. "Captain," she called out hesitantly, "you need to hear this." Leora stepped forward, her boots clicking against the metal floor. She glanced at the audio feed projected onto the main screen. At first, there was nothing but white noise. Then, faintly, a voice emerged, a distorted whisper repeating the same word over and over. "Help, help, help." The room fell silent. Everyone turned to look at Leora, waiting for her command. She frowned, studying the source of the transmission. It was coming from a rogue planet located just outside their current trajectory, a desolate world shrouded in perpetual storms. Its atmosphere glowed orange and red, like embers burning endlessly. No colony had ever been established there. No records even suggested anyone had visited it before. "What do we know about this place?" Leora asked, turning to Dr. Elias Quinn, the ship's linguist and historian. Elias adjusted his glasses, scrolling through the limited information available. "Not much," he admitted. "It's classified as uninhabitable due to extreme weather patterns and toxic gases. There are no signs of intelligent life, or any life, for that matter. But someone, or something, is sending a distress call," Leora said firmly. Her tone left no room for argument. "We can't ignore it." Tessa hesitated. "Captain, it could be a trap, or interference. We don't have enough intel to risk landing." "And if it's not?" Leora countered. "If someone, or something, is actually in trouble, we'd be abandoning our duty as explorers." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Prepare the shuttle. We're going down." As the crew scrambled to ready themselves, Leora stared out the viewport at the storm-racked planet below. Something about the signal unsettled her. It wasn't just the repetition of the word. It was the desperation behind it. Whoever sent it wasn't merely asking for help. They were pleading. Hours later, the shuttle descended into the chaos of the planet's atmosphere. Lightning arced across the sky, illuminating jagged mountains and rivers of molten rock. Acidic rain battered the hull, forcing the pilot to navigate carefully. Despite the danger, Leora remained calm, her eyes fixed on the horizon. When they finally touched down near the signal's origin, the scene awaiting them was eerie. A vast plain stretched before them, littered with strange debris that looked almost organic, twisted shapes resembling bones or roots jutting out of the ground. In the distance loomed the ruins of an ancient structure, half buried in volcanic ash. "This doesn't feel right," muttered Elias, clutching his scanner tightly. Leora ignored him, stepping onto the surface with resolve. Whatever awaited them here, she knew one thing for certain. The mystery of the SOS was only beginning, and the answers might come at a price none of them were prepared to pay. The surface of the rogue planet was a nightmare made real. The air shimmered with heat, and the acidic rain hissed as it struck the ground, eating away at anything it touched. Leora Vance led her team cautiously toward the ancient structure, their boots crunching against brittle, ash-covered terrain. Each step felt heavier than the last, not just because of the oppressive atmosphere, but also because of the growing unease that clung to them like a shadow. "This place gives me the creeps," muttered Tessa Rourke, adjusting the straps of her environmental suit. Her voice crackled over the comm system, barely audible above the howling winds. She glanced nervously at the jagged horizon, where lightning flashed in violent bursts. "Feels like we're walking into someone else's graveyard." Leora didn't respond immediately. Her sharp eyes scanned the ruins ahead, taking in every detail. The structure looked both alien and familiar. Its crumbling walls were etched with intricate carvings, spiraling patterns that seemed to pulse faintly under the dim light. It wasn't natural. Nothing about this planet was. Yet there was something eerily beautiful about it, like a forgotten masterpiece left to decay. "Stay focused," Leora ordered, her tone firm but calm. "We don't know what's waiting for us inside." Elias Quinn brought up the rear, clutching his scanner tightly. His face was pale beneath his helmet visor, sweat beading on his forehead, despite the cooling systems in his suit. He had spent years studying ancient civilizations, but this was different. The readings he was getting defied logic. Energy spikes, strange magnetic fields, and traces of organic material that shouldn't exist in such harsh conditions. Whatever built this place wasn't human, and might not even be entirely physical. As they approached the entrance, the wind died down abruptly, leaving an unsettling silence in its wake. The sudden stillness made everyone tense. Even the acid rain seemed to pause mid-air, droplets hanging unnaturally before falling again. "Did you feel that?" Tessa whispered, gripping her plasma rifle tighter. She glanced around, half expecting something to leap out from the shadows. "No time for jitters," Leora said, stepping through the archway into the structure. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the smell of decay. Faint bioluminescent fungi clung to the walls, casting an eerie green glow that illuminated the space just enough to see by. The carvings continued here too, long flowing lines that twisted into shapes resembling elongated figures with glowing eyes. "These symbols," Elias murmured, running his gloved fingers over the markings. "There's some kind of language, but I've never seen anything like it. It's advanced. Too advanced." Before he could say more, the ground trembled violently beneath their feet. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and cracks spiderwebbed across the walls. Somewhere deeper within the ruins, a low rumble echoed, growing louder with each passing second. "We need to move," Leora shouted, grabbing Elias by the arm and pulling him forward. The team sprinted down a narrow corridor, dodging falling debris as the entire structure groaned like a living thing in pain. Behind them, part of the ceiling collapsed, sealing off their exit. When the shaking finally stopped, they found themselves in a large chamber filled with strange machinery. Tubes and wires snaked along the floor, pulsating faintly with energy. At the center stood what appeared to be a hibernation pod, encased in crystalline material. Within it lay a humanoid figure, motionless but somehow alive. "What is that?" Tessa asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," Leora replied, staring at the figure. "But I think we just found the source of the signal." For a moment, no one spoke. The weight of their discovery pressed down on them. They had come looking for answers, but now it seemed they had stumbled into something far bigger and far more dangerous than any of them could have imagined. Back aboard the Aegis, the crew gathered in the ship's briefing room, their faces pale and drawn. The discovery of the hibernation pod and the mysterious figure inside it had left everyone unsettled. Leora Vance stood at the head of the table, her arms crossed as she listened to Dr. Elias Quinn explain what he had managed to decipher from the carvings in the ruins. "The symbols, they're not just random designs," Elias said, his voice tinged with both excitement and unease. He tapped a holographic display, projecting images of the intricate carvings onto the wall. "They tell a story. This species, they called themselves the Deathworlders, were once guardians of this planet. They maintained balance, kept the ecosystem in check. Tessa Rourke leaned back in her chair, frowning. Guardians? Of what? That place is a death trap. Elias hesitated, scrolling through more fragments of text. It wasn't always like that. According to these records, something happened, a catastrophe. Something they referred to as the corruption. It drove them to extinction, or so it seemed. He paused, looking up at the group. But if that's true, then who, or what, is in that pod? The question hung heavy in the air. No one had an answer, but the implications were clear. Whatever lay dormant in the ruins might not be friendly. And yet, ignoring it wasn't an option either. The distress signal had led them here for a reason, and Leora knew they couldn't turn back now. Meanwhile, Tessa noticed something strange happening aboard the ship. As she worked on repairing some of the damage caused by the planet's violent atmosphere, she began picking up anomalies in the systems. Power fluctuations rippled through the ship's circuits, causing lights to flicker and consoles to glitch. At first, she dismissed it as residual effects from the storm. But when a maintenance drone returned to her workshop damaged and covered in black ichor, her blood ran cold. "What the hell is this?" she muttered, examining the sticky substance under a microscope. It didn't match any known biological material in their database. Worse still, the drone's memory logs showed footage of shadowy movements outside the hull. Movements that shouldn't have been possible in the vacuum of space. She reported her findings to Leora immediately. "Captain, we've got a problem," Tessa said, her voice tight with worry. "Something's out there. Or maybe, in here." Leora's jaw tightened. She ordered a full sweep of the ship, instructing the crew to stay vigilant. But as the hours passed, paranoia began to creep in. Crew members whispered about missing tools and unexplained noises echoing through the corridors. One technician claimed he saw something slither past his workstation, though no one believed him when he described it as too many legs to count. Down in the medical bay, Elias pored over scans of the crystalline pod. Despite its fragile appearance, the material was impenetrable, resistant to every tool and technique they tried. Yet whenever he approached it, he felt a strange sensation, like whispers brushing against his mind. It was maddening, intrusive, and impossible to ignore. "Whatever's in there," he murmured to himself, staring at the humanoid figure encased within. "It knows we're here." As night fell, or what passed for night aboard the Aegis, the tension reached a breaking point. In the mess hall, two crew members argued loudly about whether they should abandon the mission altogether. Others sat in silence, their eyes darting toward the shadows as if expecting something to emerge. Then came the scream. It echoed through the ship, sharp and gut-wrenching, cutting off abruptly. When Leora and her team rushed to investigate, they found an empty corridor smeared with black ichor. A shredded uniform lay crumpled on the floor, its owner nowhere to be seen. "This isn't natural," Leora said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her chest. "We're dealing with something beyond us." And deep within the ruins below, the ground trembled again, as if responding to their presence. Whatever they had awakened was far from done with them. The tension aboard the Aegis was palpable, a suffocating weight that pressed down on every member of the crew. After the disappearance of one of their own, and the unsettling evidence left behind, Leora Vance knew they couldn't delay any longer. The crystalline pod had to be opened. Whatever was inside might hold answers, or at least a way to fight back against whatever lurked in the shadows. "Are we sure about this?" Tessa Rourke asked, her voice trembling as she adjusted the plasma cutter in her hands. She stood near the pod, which had been carefully transported from the ruins and secured in the ship's containment bay. Its surface shimmered faintly under the harsh lights, pulsing with an energy that seemed almost alive. "What if it's dangerous? What if it's what's causing all this?" "We don't have a choice," Leora replied firmly, though her knuckles were white as she gripped the edge of the console. Her eyes darted between the pod and the monitors displaying its readings. "Whatever's happening here started long before we arrived. If we want to survive, we need answers." Elias Quinn hovered nearby, his face pale but resolute. He clutched a datapad filled with notes he'd taken from the carvings in the ruins. Based on the symbols, this pod contains someone important. A leader, maybe. If it's truly one of the Deathworlders, it could explain why the signal led us here. With no other options, Leora gave the order. Tessa activated the plasma cutter, slicing through the crystalline material layer by painstaking layer. The process was slow, agonizing even, as sparks flew and the air grew thick with static electricity. Everyone held their breath, watching as cracks began to form across the pod's surface. Then, without warning, the pod shattered. A wave of energy rippled outward, knocking the team off their feet. For a moment, there was only silence, a deafening void where sound should have been. Then came the hum. Low and resonant, it vibrated through the floor, the walls, and deep into their bones. It wasn't just heard, it was felt. When the dust settled, the figure inside stirred. It was humanoid but unmistakably alien. Its skin was dark and leathery, etched with glowing veins that pulsed faintly like bioluminescent rivers. Its elongated limbs moved slowly, deliberately, as it rose to its full height. Eyes that glowed with an inner light locked onto each person in the room, studying them with an intelligence far beyond human comprehension. "Who are you?" Leora demanded, stepping forward despite the fear clawing at her chest. She kept her hand near her weapon, ready for anything. The being tilted its head, and suddenly, a voice echoed in their minds, not spoken aloud but transmitted directly into their thoughts. "I am Kalthar," it said, its tone calm yet commanding. "Last fragment of my kind." Tessa stumbled backward, clutching her head. "What? How is it doing that?" Kalthar ignored her, focusing instead on Leora. "You have awakened me." "Why?" Leora hesitated, then gestured toward the monitors displaying data from the planet below. "We received a distress signal. We thought someone needed help." Kalthar's expression, if it could be called that, shifted subtly. Sadness, regret, it was hard to tell. "The signal was not meant for you. It was a failsafe, a call to arms for my people. But they are gone now, consumed by the corruption I failed to stop." "The corruption?" Elias asked, stepping closer despite his fear. "What do you mean? What happened to your kind?" Kalthar turned to him, its glowing eyes piercing. "The Voresh, parasites born of chaos. They consume, corrupt, and spread until nothing remains. My people sealed themselves away to prevent the swarm from escaping this world. But the seals are breaking." As if on cue, alarms blared throughout the ship. Red lights flashed, and a panicked voice crackled over the comm system. "Captain, something's moving in the lower decks. Multiple hostiles." Leora's heart sank. She looked back at Kalthar, who remained eerily calm. "If you're telling the truth, then you owe us an explanation, and a way to stop them." Kalthar regarded her silently for a moment before nodding. "I will aid you, but know this. Survival comes at a cost. Are you prepared to pay it?" Before Leora could respond, the ship shuddered violently. Somewhere below, screams erupted, followed by the sound of tearing metal. The Aegis was no longer a sanctuary. It had become a battleground. The once pristine corridors were now filled with chaos as the crew scrambled to defend themselves against an enemy they couldn't fully comprehend. Leora Vance barked orders over the comm system, her voice cutting through the panic like a blade. "Seal off the lower decks. Contain them before they spread." But it was already too late. Kalthar stood in the containment bay, his glowing eyes scanning the monitors displaying footage from the ship's security cameras. On one screen, shadowy figures writhed and slithered through the vents. They moved unnaturally fast, their bodies shifting and contorting as if made of liquid darkness. When they emerged into the open, the crew got their first clear look at the Voresh, and it was horrifying. Each creature resembled a grotesque fusion of insect and serpent, its body segmented and covered in glistening black carapace. Rows of jagged teeth lined their gaping maws, and multiple limbs ended in razor-sharp claws that tore through metal as easily as flesh. Worst of all were their eyes, or lack thereof, where eyes should have been. There was only emptiness, yet they moved with purpose, driven by some unseen force. They are drawn to life, Calthar said quietly, his telepathic voice resonating in everyone's minds. They consume not just bodies but energy, memories, everything that makes you, you. Tessa Work tightened her grip on her plasma rifle, her hands trembling. She had seen many strange things during her time aboard the Aegis, but nothing compared to this. How do we kill them? She demanded, her voice cracking under the strain. There has to be a way. Calthar hesitated, his expression unreadable. Their weakness lies in their hive mind. Destroy the central nexus, their queen, and the swarm will falter. But the queen resides deep within the planet's core, where my people built their defenses. Leora turned to him sharply. Then that's where we're going. We'll take the fight to them. Elias Quinn stepped forward, clutching his datapad tightly. Wait, Captain. You're talking about descending even deeper into that hellhole. We barely survived last time. And what's your alternative? Leora shot back, her tone sharp. If we stay here, we die. If we don't stop the Vorish, they'll escape this planet and spread across the galaxy. Is that what you want? Elias opened his mouth to argue but closed it again, defeated. He knew she was right. Staying wasn't an option, and neither was running. As the team prepared for another descent, Calthar revealed more about the Deathworlder's defenses. My people created weapons capable of harming the Vorish, tools designed to disrupt their connection to the hive mind. Some may still exist in the ruins below. You will need them if you hope to survive. Tessa nodded grimly, already mentally cataloging materials she could scavenge to improvise additional firepower. We'll make do, she muttered. We always do. Before leaving the ship, Leora ordered a small contingent of crew members to remain behind and fortify the upper decks. Hold the line, she told them. Buy us as much time as you can. As the shuttle descended back toward the storm-racked surface, the weight of their mission settled heavily on everyone's shoulders. The planet loomed ahead, its toxic atmosphere swirling like a living thing. Lightning arced across the sky, illuminating jagged peaks and rivers of molten rock. It felt less like returning to solid ground and more like diving headfirst into the jaws of death. Inside the shuttle, silence reigned. Each member of the team was lost in their own thoughts, grappling with the enormity of what lay ahead. Elias stared out the viewport, his mind racing with questions about the Deathworlders and their tragic fate. Tessa checked and rechecked her gear, muttering curses under her breath every time something clicked or clattered louder than expected. And Leora sat rigidly in the pilot's seat, her jaw clenched as she guided the craft through the violent winds. When they landed near the ruins, the air was thick with tension. Calthar led the way, his movements fluid and deliberate. As they approached the entrance, he paused, turning to face the group. What lies ahead will test you in ways you cannot imagine. Trust nothing, not even your own senses. The corruption twists reality itself. Leora met his gaze, unwavering despite the fear gnawing at her chest. Lead the way, she said firmly. We're ready. But as they stepped into the ruins, the ground trembled beneath their feet. From the shadows came a low guttural growl, a sound that sent chills down their spines. The Vorish weren't just waiting for them. They were hunting. And they were hungry. The ruins were darker than before. The bioluminescent fungi dimmed, as if the planet itself sensed the approaching storm. Leora Vance led her team cautiously, her plasma rifle at the ready. Calthar moved ahead of them, his glowing veins casting faint light on the crumbling walls. The air was thick with tension, every sound amplified. The crunch of boots on ash, the distant rumble of seismic tremors, and the occasional skittering noise that made Tessa Work flinch. Do you hear that? She whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of their suit's life support systems. She spun around, aiming her weapon into the shadows. It's like something's following us. It is, Calthar replied without looking back. His tone was calm but carried an edge of urgency. The Vorish know we're here. They'll try to separate us, isolate us. Don't let them. Elias Quinn adjusted his glasses nervously, clutching his scanner in one hand and a makeshift energy disruptor in the other. He had spent hours cobbling it together using schematics Calthar had provided, though he wasn't entirely sure it would work. If these things are part of a hive mind, he said, trying to steady his voice, then why don't they just swarm us all at once? Why play games? They're testing us, Calthar answered simply. Learning our weaknesses, but time is not on their side. Once the Queen senses your presence, she will act. Leora frowned, glancing at the alien. You keep saying the Queen. What exactly are we dealing with down there? Calthar stopped abruptly, turning to face the group. His glowing eyes seemed to pierce through them. The Queen is the heart of the corruption. She is both creator and destroyer, the source of the Vorish's power. My people sealed her away centuries ago, but now the barriers are failing. If she breaks free, nothing will stop her from spreading beyond this world. Tessa swallowed hard, gripping her rifle tighter. Great. So we're walking straight into a nightmare factory. Anything else we should know? Calthar hesitated, then nodded. Yes. Trust no illusions. The corruption feeds on fear and doubt. It will show you what you dread most, what you desire most, and use it against you. Before anyone could respond, the ground shook violently beneath their feet. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and cracks spiderwebbed across the walls. From the darkness came a chorus of guttural growls, growing louder and closer. Shadows darted just out of sight, too fast to track. We need to move, Leora shouted, motioning for the group to follow her deeper into the ruins. They sprinted down a narrow corridor, dodging falling debris as the tremors intensified. Behind them, the Vorish emerged, dozens of them, slithering and crawling along the walls and ceilings like living nightmares. Calthar raised his arm, and a pulse of energy surged outward, forcing the creatures back momentarily. This way, he commanded, leading them toward a massive chamber at the end of the passage. Inside, the team found what appeared to be an ancient armory. Racks of weapons lined the walls, many encased in crystalline material similar to the pod that had held Calthar. Tessa immediately set to work examining the equipment, her hands moving quickly despite the chaos outside. These look advanced, she muttered, prying open one of the cases. Inside was a sleek device resembling a cross between a rifle and a staff, its surface etched with intricate patterns. Think I can modify these to work with our tech? Elias joined her, scanning the room with his datapad. There's more here than just weapons, he said, pointing to a console embedded in the wall. Looks like some kind of control system. Maybe we can reactivate the Deathworlder's defenses. As Tessa and Elias worked, Leora kept watch near the entrance, firing bursts of plasma at any Vorish that dared approach. Calthar stood beside her, his presence unnervingly still. You fight well, he said after a moment, his telepathic voice tinged with curiosity. For humans. We've had practice, Leora replied dryly, reloading her weapon. Survival tends to teach you a few tricks. Suddenly, the console lit up with a low hum, and the walls began to shift. Panels slid open, revealing hidden mechanisms and glowing conduits. The entire chamber transformed into a defensive stronghold, complete with automated turrets and energy barriers. This should buy us some time, Elias announced, wiping sweat from his brow. But it won't hold forever. Calthar nodded grimly. It is enough. For now. As the group regrouped, Leora turned to Calthar. You said you'd help us. That means trusting us too. What aren't you telling us? The alien regarded her silently for a moment before speaking. The path ahead requires sacrifice. Not everyone will survive. Are you prepared for that? Leora met his gaze without hesitation. We've come this far. We're not turning back. The deeper they ventured into the ruins, the more the environment seemed to twist and warp around them. The air grew heavier, thick with an oppressive energy that made it hard to breathe despite their suits' life support systems. Bioluminescent fungi pulsed erratically along the walls, casting flickering shadows that danced like specters in the dim light. Every step felt wrong, as if the ground beneath their feet was alive and watching. "This place, it's messing with my head," Tessa muttered, her voice trembling. She wiped at her visor, though it was already clean, trying to shake off the unease gnawing at her. "I keep hearing things, voices, but when I turn, there's nothing there." Elias nodded grimly, clutching his energy disruptor tighter. His hands were slick with sweat, and his eyes darted nervously between the shadows. "It's the corruption Calthar warned us about. It preys on fear, on doubt." He paused, swallowing hard. "Whatever you see or hear, it isn't real. But telling yourself something isn't real doesn't make it go away." For Leora, the visions began subtly, a fleeting glimpse of her younger brother out of the corner of her eye. He had died years ago during a failed mission, a loss she had never fully come to terms with. At first, she ignored it, chalking it up to exhaustion or stress. But then he appeared again, clearer this time, standing just ahead of the group in the corridor. His face was pale, his lips moving soundlessly. "Leora," he whispered, his voice faint but unmistakable. She froze, her heart pounding. "That's not possible," she murmured under her breath, shaking her head. She blinked, and he was gone. Calthar noticed her hesitation and turned to her. "Do not engage with it," he said firmly, his glowing eyes piercing through the gloom. "The corruption will exploit your grief, your guilt. Resist." Easier said than done. Tessa wasn't faring any better. As they passed through a chamber filled with jagged stalactites, she saw flashes of her childhood home, burnt and crumbling after a fire that had claimed her parents' lives. The scent of smoke filled her nostrils, so vivid it made her gag. She stumbled forward, nearly dropping her weapon, before catching herself against the wall. "Focus, Tessa." Leora snapped, grabbing her by the arm. Her tone softened when she saw the terror in the engineer's eyes. "Stay with us. Whatever you're seeing, it's not real." Even Elias, who prided himself on logic and reason, couldn't escape the hallucinations. He saw his late wife, her face pale and gaunt, reaching out to him from the darkness. "You left me," she accused, her voice cold and hollow. "You abandoned me." Each word cut deeper than any blade, forcing him to grip his disruptor until his knuckles turned white. Through it all, Calthar remained eerily unaffected. He moved with purpose, his glowing form a beacon of stability in the chaos. Yet even he seemed troubled, his expression growing darker with each step they took. "We are close," he said finally, breaking the oppressive silence. "But the corruption grows stronger here. Be vigilant." As they entered a vast cavern, the hallucinations reached a fever pitch. The walls seemed to pulse like living flesh, and the floor shifted unnaturally beneath their feet. Shadows writhed and twisted, forming grotesque shapes that mimicked their worst fears. Leora saw her entire crew dead, lying broken and lifeless around her. Tessa imagined the ship exploding behind her, leaving her stranded forever. Elias relived the moment he failed to save his wife, over and over again. Then came the whispers, low, insidious voices that slithered into their minds, feeding on their doubts. "You'll fail them. They'll die because of you. Why bother fighting?" Leora clenched her fists, forcing herself to focus. "Enough," she shouted, her voice echoing through the cavern. She turned to her team, her gaze fierce. "Listen to me. This is exactly what they want. To break us before we even reach the Queen. We can't let them win." Her words cut through the fog of despair, grounding the others just enough to push forward. Calthar nodded approvingly. "Good. You're resisting. That is the first step." At the center of the cavern stood a massive archway, pulsating with dark energy. Beyond it lay a spiraling staircase descending into the planet's core. The air shimmered with heat, and the stench of decay was overwhelming. From somewhere below came a deep, guttural roar, a sound that vibrated through their bones. "The Queen awaits," Kelthar said quietly, stepping toward the archway. "And so does the truth." No one spoke as they followed him, their weapons drawn and hearts racing. They knew the hardest part was yet to come, and the corruption wasn't done with them, not by a long shot. The staircase spiraled downward into darkness, its steps slick with condensation, and faintly glowing veins that pulsed like veins in living flesh. Each step echoed unnaturally, as if the planet itself was breathing beneath their feet. The air grew hotter, heavier, pressing down on them despite their suits' cooling systems. Lyora Vance led the way, her plasma rifle at the ready, her jaw clenched tightly. Behind her, Tessa Rourke and Elias Quinn followed closely, their faces pale but determined. Kelthar brought up the rear, his glowing form casting an eerie light that barely pierced the oppressive gloom. As they descended, the walls around them began to change. What had once been stone and metal now resembled something organic. Rib-like structures jutted out from the ceiling, pulsating faintly with a sickly green glow. Strange symbols etched into the surface shifted and writhed as though alive, watching their every move. The deeper they went, the stronger the sense of wrongness became, a gnawing feeling that clawed at their minds, urging them to turn back. "We're close," Kelthar said suddenly, his telepathic voice cutting through the tension. "The Nexus lies ahead." "The Nexus?" Tessa asked, her voice trembling. She adjusted her grip on her weapon, glancing nervously at the shifting walls. "What exactly is it?" "It is the core of my people's power," Kelthar replied, his tone grim. "A biomechanical construct designed to maintain balance across this world. When activated, it can purge the corruption or destroy everything." Elias frowned, clutching his energy disruptor tighter. "And you trust us to use it, after everything we've seen down here?" Kelthar hesitated before answering. "I have no choice. My kind failed to stop the Vorish. Perhaps yours will succeed where we could not." Before anyone could respond, the group reached the bottom of the staircase. What awaited them took their breath away. The chamber was enormous, easily the size of a small city. At its center stood the Nexus, a colossal structure that defied description. It looked both mechanical and biological, its surface covered in twisting conduits and pulsating organs that glowed with an otherworldly light. Energy crackled around it in arcs of blue and red, creating a deafening hum that vibrated through their bones. Surrounding the Nexus were hundreds of dormant pods, each containing what appeared to be more Deathworlders, frozen in stasis. This is incredible," Elias whispered, his eyes wide with awe. He stepped closer, scanning the structure with his datapad. "If we can activate this thing, it might actually work. We could end the Vorish for good." "But how do we do it?" Tessa asked, her voice tinged with desperation. "It looks like it's been offline for centuries." Kelthar moved forward, placing a hand against the Nexus. The moment he touched it, the entire structure flared to life, bathing the chamber in blinding light. A surge of energy rippled outward, knocking the team off their feet. When the light faded, the alien turned to face them, his expression unreadable. "To awaken the Nexus requires merging with it," he explained. "One must become part of its consciousness." Lyora's eyes narrowed. "You mean sacrifice yourself?" Kelthar nodded slowly. "Yes, but I cannot do it alone. The process must be initiated manually and stabilized. If it fails, the resulting explosion will tear this planet apart." Tessa shook her head, panic rising in her chest. "There has to be another way. We didn't come all this way just to throw ourselves into some suicide mission." "There isn't," Kelthar said firmly, his glowing eyes locked onto Lyora's. "This is why you are here, to finish what my people started." For a moment, no one spoke. The weight of the decision hung heavy in the air. Finally, Lyora stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear gripping her heart. "Tell us what to do." Before Kelthar could respond, the ground trembled violently. From the shadows emerged the Vorish, dozens of them slithering and crawling toward the group. Their jagged teeth gleamed in the dim light, and their guttural growls filled the chamber. Behind them loomed a massive figure, the Queen. "She's here," Calthor said, his voice calm but urgent. "We have no time left." As the swarm surged forward, Leora shouted orders, rallying her team. "Tessa, set charges around the perimeter. Elias, get that console online. We'll hold them off as long as we can." The battle erupted in chaos. Plasma bolts and disruptor blasts lit up the chamber as the crew fought desperately to buy time. Calthar unleashed waves of energy, forcing the Vorish back momentarily, but they kept coming, relentless and hungry. In the midst of the carnage, Leora glanced at the Nexus, then at Calthar. She knew what had to be done, and she wasn't sure they'd all make it out alive. The chamber was a cacophony of chaos. Plasma bolts seared through the air, disruptor beams crackled against the chitinous armor of the Vorish, and the guttural roars of the swarm echoed like thunder. Leora Vance fired her rifle with precision, each shot aimed to buy precious seconds for Tessa and Elias to complete their tasks. But no matter how many creatures they killed, more poured in from the shadows, relentless and unyielding. Calthar stood at the forefront, his glowing form radiating waves of energy that repelled the swarm momentarily. Yet even he couldn't hold them off forever. His movements were slower now, his light dimming as if the effort was draining him. "Hurry," he shouted telepathically, his voice strained. "The Queen approaches." Behind him, the massive figure of the Vorish Queen emerged fully into view, towering over the battlefield. Her body was grotesque, a writhing mass of segmented limbs and jagged spines, her maw lined with rows of serrated teeth that dripped with acid. Her empty eye sockets seemed to pierce through everyone, locking onto Calthar with predatory intent. With a deafening screech, she lunged forward, scattering debris and forcing the team to dive out of the way. "Tessa, status." Leora barked, rolling behind a fallen pillar to reload her weapon. "Almost done." Tessa yelled back, her hands trembling as she rigged the last charge around the perimeter. The explosives wouldn't destroy the Nexus. They were meant to seal off the chamber once the activation process began. If they failed, there would be no escape. Elias worked frantically at the console near the base of the Nexus, his fingers flying over the controls. Sweat dripped down his face as he deciphered the alien interface, muttering under his breath. "Come on. Come on." Finally, the console lit up with a low hum, and the structure responded, its pulsating glow intensifying. "I've got it online, but someone needs to stabilize it manually." Calthar stepped forward without hesitation. "It must be me." "No," Leora shouted, lowering her weapon. "There has to be another way." "There isn't," Calthar replied calmly, turning to face her. For the first time, his expression softened, almost human-like. "This is my purpose, to protect this world, even if it means giving myself to it. My people failed, but you can succeed where we could not." Before anyone could argue further, Calthar placed both hands on the Nexus. A surge of energy erupted outward, lifting him off the ground as tendrils of light wrapped around his body. The entire chamber vibrated violently, and the dormant pods containing the other Deathworlders began to crack open, releasing faint glimmers of light. "What's happening?" Tessa screamed, shielding her eyes from the blinding radiance. "He's merging with the Nexus," Elias shouted, backing away as the energy intensified. "It's amplifying his consciousness. He's becoming part of it." The Vorish Queen let out an ear-splitting roar, charging toward the Nexus. But before she could reach it, Calthar unleashed a final pulse of energy, creating a barrier that held her at bay. His voice resonated one last time in their minds. "Go. Now." Leora hesitated, torn between staying and retreating. Then she saw the determination in Calthar's fading form and knew what had to be done. "Fall back," she ordered, grabbing Tessa by the arm and pulling her toward the staircase. Elias followed close behind, clutching his datapad tightly. As they reached the top of the stairs, Tessa detonated the charges remotely. The entrance collapsed in a cascade of rubble, sealing the chamber, and Calthar, inside. The ground shook violently as the Nexus surged to life, sending shockwaves throughout the planet. Back aboard the Aegis, the crew watched in awe as the toxic storms above the planet began to dissipate, replaced by clear skies and lush greenery. It was as if the corruption had been purged entirely. But Leora felt no joy. She stared at the holographic display of the planet below, her heart heavy with loss. Calthar had sacrificed everything, not just for his world, but for theirs too. And deep within the ruins, a faint glow remained, pulsing softly. Perhaps some fragment of the Deathworlder still lingered, watching over the reborn paradise they had fought so hard to save. The Aegis hovered silently in orbit above the rogue planet, its once hostile surface now transformed into something breathtakingly beautiful. Toxic storms had given way to clear skies painted with hues of gold and lavender, while rivers of molten rock cooled into crystalline streams that shimmered under twin suns. Lush vegetation sprouted across the landscape, vibrant greens and purples spreading like a living tapestry over what was once a barren wasteland. It was as if the planet itself had exhaled, a long-held breath released after centuries of suffocation. But aboard the ship, there was no celebration. The weight of what they had endured and lost hung heavy in the air. Captain Leora Vance stood on the observation deck, staring out at the transformed world below. Her reflection in the viewport showed tired eyes and a furrowed brow, but her posture remained resolute. She clutched a small data crystal in her hand, the only record of Calthar's final moments, his voice preserved as both a warning and a testament to his sacrifice. Tessa Rourke joined her quietly, leaning against the railing with a sigh. "It doesn't feel real," she said softly, her gaze fixed on the planet. "Like, we should have paid more for this. You know, lost more." Leora nodded slowly, her jaw tightening. "We did lose. Calthar gave everything so we could walk away, so others wouldn't have to face what he faced." She paused, turning the data crystal over in her hands. "His people saved us, even after they were gone. We owe them." Elias Quinn entered the room moments later, his usual nervous energy replaced by a somber calm. He carried a datapad filled with scans and notes from their journey, though he doubted anyone would ever fully understand the significance of what they'd uncovered. "I've documented everything," he said quietly, holding up the device. "Calthar's story, the Deathworlders, the Vorash, all of it. If nothing else, humanity needs to know what happened here." "They'll call it a myth," Tessa muttered bitterly. "Or worse, twist it into some kind of propaganda. Human ingenuity saves the galaxy." She shook her head. "They won't care about him." "They will," Leora replied firmly, her voice cutting through the gloom. "Because I'll make sure they do. This isn't just our story, it's theirs too." Calthar didn't die for nothing. As the crew prepared to leave orbit, the planet seemed to respond one last time. From deep within its core, a faint pulse of light radiated outward, visible even from space. It wasn't aggressive or menacing, just a quiet acknowledgement, as if the Nexus itself was saying goodbye. "What was that?" Elias asked, his voice tinged with awe. "Maybe." Leora hesitated, glancing back at the glowing horizon. "Maybe it's Calthar, or what's left of him." Tessa frowned, crossing her arms. "You think he's still alive? In there?" "I don't know," Leora admitted. "But if anyone could survive something like that, it's him." Silence fell between them as the Aegis turned its engines toward home. The journey ahead would be long, and none of them would ever forget the horrors or the heroism they had witnessed. But as they left the planet behind, a sense of hope lingered. Hope that the sacrifices made would not be forgotten. Hope that the balance Calthar fought so hard to restore would endure. Hours later, as the crew settled into their routines, Leora recorded her final log entry before transmitting it to command. Her words were simple but heartfelt. To those who hear this message, remember the Deathworlders. Remember Kalthar. They were guardians of a fragile world, protectors of life when darkness threatened to consume it. Their legacy lives on, not just in the planet they saved, but in the lessons they taught us. That survival is not enough, that courage demands sacrifice, and that even in the face of impossible odds, hope can prevail. She ended the recording with a lingering glance at the planet shrinking in the distance. Somewhere far below, a faint glow pulsed again, a reminder that perhaps not all endings are truly final. And with that, the Aegis disappeared into the stars, carrying with it the story of a forgotten people and the promise of a brighter future.